Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank General Goldfein for bringing attention to the downed F-16 at Joint Base Andrews. It's in my district. Glad to hear that no life-threatening injuries to the pilot, no reported injuries on the ground. Obviously, it's early. Investigation will reveal the cause, but I'm confident that with greater resources, we do reduce the number of aircraft incidents that are related to either human error training or maintenance. This is yet just another example of the need to continue to invest in readiness, modernization, and in the men and women that do the difficult work that we ask them to do. Look, I was on the USS Nimitz last weekend, and I looked at those sailors. Average age is 23. We ask them to do things that few Americans want to do today. It's dangerous. It's important. They're excited about it. Big majority of those sailors, first deployment and the first time that they were working with one another. But they're confident that they're going to be able to do the job that we asked them to do. And I said to them, and I wanted to reassure them, that Congress recognizes that we are a great nation because of the work that they do. We are the most prosperous nation in the world, not just economically, culturally, our democracy, our religious tolerance, because of the work that men and women in uniform do. So we owe it to them to invest in the work that they do. But we also owe it to the country to ensure that we continue to be prosperous by investing in good schools, safe neighborhoods, a clean environment, and health care. And there was no debate on that. And Admiral Byrne, who's doing a great job on the USS Nimitz and that strike group, he gets that as well. So you're doing a great job. I appreciate what you're doing. Here's my question, and it has to do with BRAC. Because as we're looking, for all different ways to resource what we need to do, to find the resources, the assets, the equity, the funding, here's my question. The Acting Assistant Secretary of Defense for Energy, Installations, and Environment testified about a few years ago that a future base realignment and closure round will cost about $6 billion to implement and will result in $6 billion in initial savings and then $2 billion per year. The Army and the Air Force in particular have been arguing that maintaining excess basing capacity diverts scarce resources from maintaining readiness and mission capability to maintain an unneeded infrastructure. If a new round were to be authorized, how would you reduce excess infrastructure and balance the force? And given the potentially significant upfront cost to implement a BRAC round, what other ways, if any, exist that would permit you to dispose of excess capacity at a potentially lower cost?
For the Army, we do have excess capacity to the tune of about $500 million to $1 billion that we would gladly try to shed if we could. And at the same time, we have failed and failing infrastructure out there, about 22%, 33,000 facilities across the entire Army throughout the world that are in really bad shape that need work. Continuing resolution or return to BCA funding is going to stop the progress we're trying to make against that 22% of our facilities that are in bad shape, and obviously it's going to prevent any sort of BRAC, which we would encourage, so we can get rid of the $500 million to about $1 billion worth of unneeded infrastructure that we have.
So I'll just add that, when we talk BRAC, we tend to focus on the C, and we don't spend enough on the R. The C being closure, the R being realignment. And quite frankly, for the Air Force, it's as important for us to have the flexibility to realign as it is to talk about closure. And quite frankly, to General Milley's point, when I look to this lens, I look more at the infrastructure I have right now and ensuring that we have a budget that allows us the MILCON dollars to be able to improve what we need, not only to bring on new mission, but to fix dorms, that are World War II era, to get the facilities that we need, to be able to demolish those things that we don't need, to bring our footprint in, so we're not having to spend these precious dollars on keeping large installations open, not only open, but keeping all of those buildings continually be run, right, when I don't actually need them given the size of the force. So for us, this starts with why we're here, which is to talk about, first and foremost, getting a budget, so we can get into our military construction projects and our modernization that we need and our restoration that we need. That, to me, is far more important than a discussion about a future BRAC.
Mr. Scott?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Goldfein, good to see you again.
Most Americans would be surprised to learn that the average age of an aircraft in the Air Force today is 27 years old, and that some fleets, like the J-Stars, are nearly 50 years old. How would a year-long continuing resolution affect the Air Force's ability to recapitalize these 50-year-old J-Stars aircraft?
Hey, sir, thank you. And, you know, you're right, almost 50 years, about 48 years average that these J-Stars or aircraft are being used. And as the Air Component Commander deployed forward, working in CENTCOM, you know, we often talk about what we do with these aircraft relative to the ground fight, but I will tell you they're as equally important to the maritime domain and what we do for Admiral Richardson and his forces as well. So these are critical aircraft. Right now, a 5-month continuing resolution would delay the contract vehicle that we're working on right now, the risk reduction on the radar, to be able to move that forward. And it's not a linear. We don't just pick it up again because, again, back to industry. If we go back to industry, they're going to have to manage that workforce, and that workforce may walk. And so when we pick it up again, there's no telling what the long-term impact of delaying our ability to be able to recapitalize that critical weapon system.
General, I'm also concerned about the loss of the weapon system when they go in for, I mean, they're going to be overdue for major depot overhauls, and then they're not going to be in the air flying, and certainly seems to me better to put that money into new aircraft with new technology than to rebuild 50-year-old planes.
So that's what we're trying to do, and you made a point about the maintenance. Civilian workforce, who are the ones that tend to, who are at our depots, who keep these much older aircraft flying, are the ones that are impacted the most personnel-wise from a CR. And so you lose literally hundreds of man-hours of being able to get the depot maintenance on these older aircraft to keep them airborne.
Yes, sir. And I hope that y'all will maintain that position that you do not want a CR. General Milley, congratulations on the pistol. Long overdue. You state in your that's the first time I've seen you laugh. Yeah. You state in your testimony that over 80% of the U.S. military forces in Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan are U.S. Army soldiers. Building on what General Goldfein has stated today about the impact of the continuing resolution on the Air Force, how would the constraint on heavy lift and combat support aircraft impact your piece of the fight against ISIS?
Well, frankly, the Army's dependent, and we're all dependent on each other, as General Neller said earlier. With respect to heavy lift, I mean, the Army can't get to the fight without the Navy or the Air Force. Just can't get there. Our people and equipment doesn't arrive at the point of decision without the transport capabilities of the Navy and the Air Force. So it would be significant if the Air Force doesn't have that kind of capability. So we're a big advocate. We in the Army are a huge advocate for the Navy, the Air Force, and the Marines who are on the ground with us. It's a joint fight. And I, as a soldier, I want the most unbelievable Air Force the world has ever known, because the soldier's best friend is when a fixed-wing Air Force pilot is showing up in his aircraft when we're in contact. And that's the first call we all make, is to the United States Air Force or Navy or Marines, whatever aircraft's flying around there, or an Army attack helicopter, to come to us to make sure it's an uneven fight on the ground. So I want the best Navy, the best Air Force, the best Marine Corps as the Chief of Staff of the Army. It's a single joint fight.
Could you reiterate the impact if we don't get the $5 billion for the urgent operational requirements for Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan to counter ISIS and the additional intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance? Could you reiterate your points on the consequences to our deployed forces in those areas in our operational mission if the supplemental is not passed?
Candidly, Congressman, I'd like to do that, but I'd like to do that in a classified session to talk about specific operational impacts. What I would say just here is it would be negative, and it would be unhelpful to the ongoing efforts.
Well, gentlemen, I want to thank you all for your service, and I hope that you will continue to maintain the position of no CR. This has gone on way too long. Thank you, and God bless you. I yield back.
Ms. Rosen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Smith, and I thank you
all of you for your testimony today and being here, and we know how detrimental the continuing resolution is to everyone's ability to plan, prepare, and do long-range strategic planning, not just in our military, but in every area of our nation that affects all of us in the country worldwide. But I want to ask General Goldfein a question. Of course, I represent Nevada's 3rd District. Nellis Air Force Base is just a few miles outside my district. And of course, it is one of our main combat training exercises, the red flag, right there. Very important to us, very important to you. And so we're designed to provide our pilots with their first 10 combat missions prior to actually flying in combat there. So is red flag going to be included in the stand down under a continuing resolution this time?
Yes, ma'am. I think what you've already heard from us is that one of the first things that will go as we look at where we have to go for the money, like for the Air Force, where do I find $2.8 billion? One of the first places I have to go is to cancel exercises. So I've got airmen right now that are actually scheduled to deploy, that are scheduled to come to Nellis to do their first 10 combat missions in that unmatched training environment that will not go do that training. They're still going to deploy. We don't stop the deployment because that's what the nation calls on us to do. We just go less ready. So we're all going to end up canceling rotations at National Training Center, at Fallon, at Camp Lejeune, and clearly at Nellis.
So you'd say the impact of a continuing resolution impacts human lives, obviously the lives of our soldiers and will impact the lives of their families because we're not able to pass a budget.
Ma'am, I'll share a very personal story. So, Captain Goldfein, day 1, Desert Storm, never been into combat. We had one guy in the whole formation that had been into combat in Vietnam, and we all went across the line. And I remember the first time I heard AAA, anti-aircraft, right 2 o'clock,
Right.
and we all looked. And then I remember hearing SA-2 left 10 o'clock, and we all saw our first surface-to-air missile. And then I remember hearing splashed MiG-29, and I was in the formation. I saw a MiG-29 hit the ground, and I remember that moment in my cockpit. And I remember the confidence that came over my cockpit because I realized I've seen this before. I've heard these radio calls. I've actually seen Smoky Sam simulators simulating AAA and surface-to-air missiles. I've never seen an airplane hit the ground before, right. But I've heard this. I've been in this environment before, and you can't imagine the confidence that came over my cockpit. And all of those who were flying that day that said, "We've been here, we can do this mission," and we went in and we crushed it. So what Nellis provides is confidence in the air and confidence under fire, and so it concerns me that we're not going to give that training to our young men and women.
Well, I think we know that from everything we do. The more training you have, the more muscle memory you have, the better able you are to execute your job, no matter what it is.
Ma'am, if I could also just pile on, there's a great responsibility we have to do things different and better as well. We can't just keep doing the same things for the same cost and expect to be effective.
Right.
And Nellis and Fallon and our training ranges, that is where that development is done. That is where we experiment. That is where we learn the new ways to fight, more effective ways to fight, more efficient ways to fight. And so it's not just going on and doing sets and reps. This is learning how to fight in the future. It's extremely important.
Well, I thank you for your service, and I, for one, don't want to send one more service member into battle unprepared. Thank you.
Dr. Winstrup.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for being with us today. In budgeting decisions, we don't get to decide ourselves here in this committee. It's beyond us. And I just don't know how many of our members sometimes really dwell on or understand the details and the difficulty that goes into running an efficient and effective military. And when we're in this discussion today, it's probably the most grave I've heard since I've been here, and rightfully so. And I know that each of you look at your troops as part of your family. And that's what makes this even tougher, to think the environment that you're being asked to be put in and your family members being asked to be put in. We've touched a little bit about what happens to those next to deploy. They may deploy, but they're not going to be as ready as they should be. And I'm also would like to hear from you, if we could, on the consequences of those that are currently deployed in Iraq Syria, Afghanistan, and what's going through your mind if we find ourselves in the situation that may happen, which we do not want. And I'll start with you, General Neller.
As we've all said, we'll make trades. I mean, I think we're pretty flexible. We're all in learning organizations, and as much as we don't like the fiscal situation we've been in, you know, we're mission-oriented and we figured it out. But I think at this point, what you're seeing is those that are forward deployed have got the best gear, they got the best part support, they got the best training we can give them. The next one's out the door then, and it goes down from there. But because of the security environment that we see, the folks that just came back, if you would, the people on deck, are actually in the hole, in the dugout, getting ready to run on the field. Those are the ones that are going to end up getting the shorter end of the stick. I mean, there's a normal level and rhythm of a force and how you train it. But if we have to make cuts, for example, if we had a CR as opposed to the budget that you've all passed, that's an $800 million delta for the Marine Corps. 500 on the ground side, 300 on the air side. So those that are in the dugout, in the hole, if you will, they're the ones that are going to take the hit. And then when they get on deck, you'll be chasing yourself to try to catch up, to get the reps and the sets you need, and the time is not there. We just don't have the time that we used to have. So that's the risk. That's the risk. And that's just in today's fight. If you go to one of the other adversaries that we've all talked about, and we continue to maintain the current ops, those are the ones that are going to have to go there, or you're going to have to shift the force. So that's the risk that we've all talked about.
So we're going to add that, you know, we've all had a lot of time deployed forward and a lot of time deployed together. And when we would do our battlefield circulation and talk to our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, we would always get, most of us get the same question, okay, exactly what are we doing here? And we could all give that speech. The hardest question to answer was, why isn't anybody talking about it back home? Why are we all completely focused about it here forward, but nobody's focused on it back home? That was the hardest question to answer as a commander in the field. So my concern in terms of those who are deployed forward right now and for their families is they're going to ask the question, are we serious about this or not? Is their risk going forward worth it or not? And I'm not sure if we don't even pass a budget, we can look them in the eye and tell them that we should, that what they're doing forward is on the minds of this Congress.
I appreciate that, General. Admiral?
Sir, I'll just, one word is munitions. That's how the forward force will be affected. Every one of my strike group commanders that comes back is coming back on fumes when it comes to munitions. And this is the good stuff, if you will, the precision munitions, the ones that we are using for a very good reason. And so I know that General Milley feels that same shortage, and that's an absolutely critical part of this recovery, is to restock our magazines with the munitions we need to prevail.
Thank you.
Congressman, for those that are deploying, we try to ensure that they get the maximum equipment and training. It's really the bench, as General Neller said. And then, as Admiral Richardson said about munitions, we're critically short. And I'm not going to go into it publicly, and I'm happy to do it in classified sessions, but a discussion of munitions is important. And for the Army, we actually, I didn't realize this before becoming the chief, but we actually make the bombs for the aircraft that the Navy, Air Force, and Marines fly. They add all the precision stuff, but we make the basic bombs at our joint munitions facility, for which we're responsible for. Next month, we're not going to be able to ship those bombs to our sister services for training. The operational things will be taken care of, but at Nellis, at the different red flags and so on, they're not going to have bombs to drop. They're not going to have that practice that Fingers just talked about, that General Goldfein just talked about. So munitions is critical, and that's going to, the shipping of those munitions, training munitions, is going to cease here in the next month or two. And the other thing that we talk about is leader development. Missed training, missed opportunities, say we miss 6 months of training, that's an entire generation of lieutenants and captains that are going to miss training that's never going to be made up, sergeants and so on. The other piece is like this summer. We're not going to be able to run ROTC summer camp or military academy summer camp at West Point. We're going to have 74% of second lieutenants in the United States Army won't get commissioned in FY18 because they won't be qualified because their summer camp's going to be missed this summer. So there's enormous amount of consequence in all kinds of areas if we go with a continuing resolution or return to BCA and we don't get this budget and supplemental passed, and quickly.
Thank you, General.
Mr. Carbajal.
Thank you, Chairman Thornberry and Ranking Member Smith, and thank you all for coming and addressing us today, and thank you for your service. Even with the Budget Control Act repeal, we will not have a blank check and must prioritize as intelligently as possible. While some estimates put costs at an additional $1.2 billion per 10,000 uniformed personnel, how do you reconcile the need to train and equip the current force with the desire to increase in strength?
Well, for the Army, they're interlinked. The idea of the readiness of the force, the size, capacity, and capability of the force. Obviously, what we want for this budget for 17 is we want to fill holes. There are already holes existing in the forces, not increasing the force structure. The increased end strength is not to make the Army bigger in terms of number of brigades and divisions and so on. It's to make the units that do exist whole, to make them capable of doing adequate levels of training. Training a unit at 65 or 70% strength is inadequate. You take 10% casualties in combat, maybe 15%, you're going to be a combat ineffective unit. Yet we're training on a routine basis units at 65, 70, 75% strength at the training centers for the high-end collective training. So this increase in end strength, I want to be careful that it's not mischaracterized as an increase in the Army. It's not. It's a filling of the holes in the existing force structure. And I think that's an important piece of it, and that's how I would reconcile it. We're not increasing brigades and divisions or any of that. We're just filling holes in existing existing units.
Can I add that, because it's the exact same thing in the Air Force. We're filling formations to do the mission that we've been given. I'll also tell you that you need those forces to actually achieve the training, to be able to build the time you need and the forces you need to support the training we've been talking about. And here's how sometimes this gets masked. So when I was a younger pilot and I would show up at the aircraft, I'd meet my crew chief and the dedicated crew chief and the assistant, and we'd walk around the airplane, and then I'd taxi to the end of the runway, and a different crew would be there to meet me. And they'd pull the pins and arm the aircraft, and I'd take off, and I'd go to another destination, and a third crew would be there to meet me. Here's what often happens when you get to the shortfalls that we're seeing right now. You taxi slow because the same single crew chief has got to get to the end of the runway because it's the same individual that's pulling your pins and arming you. And then you have to fly slow because that guy's got to get on a C-17 and fly to the next location to be able to meet you. That's a vignette of some of the ways that we're managing this smaller force. To the General Milley's point, this is not about growing the Air Force or the Army. This is about filling holes.
I would say for us it's a little bit different. This body authorized an increase in 3,000 Marines, and those Marines are going to do different missions than the 184,000 are doing today, because we have a requirement to develop different capabilities that we think we need for the future fight. So if that money's not there and we can't grow the force, we're going to develop those capabilities, but it's going to come out of that 182,000 base. So 3,000 Marines that are doing something today are going to do something different. And that's going to reduce our overall, our capability in those particular areas. So we've got to grow these new capabilities. Yeah, there's going to be some filling of shortfalls and in maintenance and other places, but ours is different. We've got to build a force that's ready to fight what we think we're going to face in 2025.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Ms. Stefanik.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for your leadership and for your service. In my district, which is New York's 21st District, I represent two of our nation's premier military installations, Fort Drum, which is home of the 10th Mountain Division, and Kesselring, which is a naval nuclear training facility. My first question is for General Milley, and it's regarding Army's aviation readiness. The 10th Mountain Combat Aviation Brigade is currently supporting Operation Atlantic Resolve throughout EUCOM, and I have serious concerns that the CR could limit future aviation capabilities and training opportunities like the ongoing deployment of the 10th Mountain. Could you describe how a CR would impact the Army's aviation readiness specifically, its training, and on top of that, the pilot shortage that the Army is already experiencing?
Thanks, Congresswoman. I appreciate that and climb glory for the mighty 10th Mountain Division. Shout out to the North Country. A continuing resolution or a return to BCA would have significant negative effect on Army rotary wing aviation. We're already short 741 pilots, which we're trying, if we can get the budget passed with the supplemental, we'll try to make that up. But if we don't get the budget passed with the supplemental, we're not going to make that up, and that's going to increase several hundred more, and that's across the entire total Army with the act of the National Guard and the U.S. Army Reserve. For the National Guard specifically, there's about 1,300 pilot seats available in a given year or that won't be available in the following year as a result of a continuing resolution. Those would be National Guard and Reserve seats. There's about another 1,000 seats that might not be available for the regular Army. We are going to try to preserve and fence the flying hour program for those already qualified pilots that are in units, although I must mention that the standard is about 14 hours, 15 hours a month of rotary wing flying. We've reduced that over the last 8 years. So the new normal, if you will, is something around the 12 or 13 hours, but we're going to preserve the 12 or 13 hours. We don't like the new normal, but the flying hour program will try to fence that. For units that are deploying, we'll make sure that they get the appropriate levels of training to deploy into combat. And the last piece is upgrading the fleet. The continuing resolution or BCA is going to prevent us from putting active protective systems for missile defense on the aircraft. We'll not be able to upgrade some of the modernization efforts we have inside the cockpits. We're going to be short on the munitions and Hellfires, et cetera, for the Apaches, and most importantly, we're not going to be able to buy the additional Apaches we need to fill the holes in the existing force structure for both the regular Army and the National Guard. It'll be a significant negative impact on Army aviation.
Thank you, General Milley. And my second question is for Admiral Richardson. I understand the second moored training ship requires a new start and full funding this year to provide training for nuclear operators. And I'm asking this question in context of Kesselring. What is the current status of the second MTS, and how would a CR create challenges for the Navy if it is not funded and allowed to start in FY17?
Ma'am, great question, and thanks for your support of Kesselring and everything that they do up there. There's been a fair amount of talk about a balanced approach, and that everything that has to do with national health and particularly national security doesn't all reside in defense. And Kesselring is a great example of that, where a lot of that site is supported by the Department of Energy and NNSA, and so it's critical that we understand that those relationships. And if we're not training operators and developing new nuclear technologies up there, we're training them on our moored training ships. And this second moored training ship is the next generation. Right now we're using ships that were built in the 60s to do that. They're the oldest operating nuclear power plants, I think, in the country, and it's time to recapitalize those. This is a new start. There's been a lot of talk about funding flexibility. The continuing resolution is the opposite of funding flexibility. It is absolute funding rigidity. You have to continue to do the things you'd like to stop. You can't do the things you'd like to start. One of the things I'd like to start is that second moored training ship, and I can't do it with a CR.
Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Swazi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, let me say I'm very sobered and humbled by the responsibility that we have listening to your testimony. It's really incredible the vocation that you've made with your lives and how dedicated you are to this mission that you have. I'm new to this job. I'm formerly a mayor and a county executive of a large county with a $2.8 billion budget. I'm a freshman in the minority and don't have as much influence as I'd like to have, obviously. But I know that there's an important mission that the Congress has, and I really want you to know that I'm going to do the best I can to communicate that we're dealing with people's lives here, the people that work for you. And what we do has a tremendous impact on their lives, and as you pointed out so eloquently, on their morale and on their effectiveness. I want to just look at some big picture things. The overall budget in 2016 was about $580 billion, and personnel made up 24% of that overall budget, and O&M made up 42% of that budget. So that's a big number, 42% of the budget for O&M, and 20% went to procurement, and 13% went for other. So I just want, and it's going to be different for each of your services. You know, in the Army, they're not going to be procuring as much in equipment, for example, and but you're all spending about this 40% in O&M. And I just want to ask you, from a big picture perspective, does that make sense that we're spending as much as we are on O&M, on operation and maintenance? Or should that be something over time that we're trying to change? So go ahead.
Well, we're a little bit different. I mean, our people accounts about 65% of our budget. At least the Green Marine Corps budget is about 65%. Our O&M, probably about 15%. Our acquisition and the facilities make up the rest.
Now, a lot of your equipment is in the Navy, though, right? They have
Our aviation is naval aviation, but all our ground equipment is we own our ground equipment.
Okay.
So, you know, we're a small percentage of the overall force, but most of our cost is people. So I take your point, but if we have people costs, or we have to increase the size of the force, or the force gets more senior, or their pay raise that is voted upon, then those bills, or we have to make those trades, and the trades are in those other areas, in operations and maintenance, in procurement modernization, or in facilities. And so then you start to build up a deficit in those areas. And you've got a force that's what a hollow force is. It's a large force. So there's trades. We can reduce the size of the force. We can reduce acquisition. So those are the puts and takes that always go on as we manage the budget. But we're probably not a good example of what you're looking at as far as a large amount of O&M.
Thank you.
Sir, it's actually no mystery for an Air Force. Older aircraft are more expensive to fly, period. And so what happens with us is you get an average aircraft age of 27 years. And when I go out and talk to airmen, you know, every once in a while I'll find somebody who's been driving a 27-year-old car. Not many. But when you find somebody like that, one of the things they know is they know that that company stopped building parts for that car 11 years after.
Yeah.
So when you're 27 years old, right, there was a Fox News special that maybe you saw that had B-1 maintainers that were actually cruising museums to find parts to keep those B-1s flying. That's what it takes to keep older aircraft flying. So when you look at our O&M costs going up, it's because that's a direct result of aircraft age. And so as we try to procure and try to get that aircraft age going down, what comes along with that quite frankly is a bigger bill than the procurement cost, is the sustainment cost over the life cycle of that weapon system. So we drive that down as much as we possibly can.
Admiral?
So I'll just say, I think General Goldfein and I share that we're a pretty capital-intensive force, right? So we operate a lot of stuff. We have to fuel it, maintain it, that sort of thing. And so we've got about between 25 and 30% of our budget in the Navy is operations. And I think the General captured it very well. You know, newer things don't require so much maintenance. And so this renewal of the force, you know, in the end of the day, it helps us do our business for less operating and maintenance cost.
So for the two of you, as a general rule, is a long-term, if you could have the Congress work with you effectively and you could get your way along over time, would you like to see your O&M be a lower percentage of your budget? And where would you rather see it increase, in procurement or in personnel?
I think that both for operations and for procurement, stable, adequate funding, that's the way I'd like to partner with Congress the most.
General?
For the Army, we come in at about just a little bit less than 50% for MILPERS or personnel costs, which is, you know, no surprise. Cost of labor is economics 101, and that's going to be your expensive factor of production. For us, O&M, accounts, as you said, just under, in our case, just under 40%. So what is operation maintenance for the Army? It's ammunition, it's fuel or POL products for the vehicles, flight hours for aviation, and importantly, parts. So our O&M costs have gone up in the last couple of years. Why? Because we are trying to intensify our levels of readiness and training for combined arms operations against a near-peer threat. We've been fighting for 16 consecutive years against guerrillas and terrorists in tennis shoes with IEDs and AKs in desert terrain in the Middle East. We don't know, no one knows, where the next conflict will occur. We don't want to be preparing for the last war for the next war. So we don't know. We have to keep all the cards on the table for the U.S. military to be able to fight a wide range of threats. So we have reemphasized combined arms, higher-end combat, unless you are specifically deploying. That training is having positive effect over the last couple of years, about 24 to 36 months or so, and we're seeing improvements slightly in our readiness in that regard. If we don't pass the budget with the supplemental and we continue with the CR, or we go to BCA funding, that level of training is going to come to a halt, and that readiness improvement is going to stop. So we need to continue funding O&M in order to do that for current day readiness. For procurement, in the Army's case, what we've done, we biased current readiness, today's fight and the next couple of years' readiness. And we are really mortgaging the future in terms of our procurement. We only put 20% of our money into research, development, science, technology.
Saw that.
And we need to improve that.
Okay, well, thank you very much, gentlemen. Again, I know that our mission is to do our jobs to try and help you do your jobs, so thank you.
Mr. Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to all of you for being here today. This body historically has wrestled with these issues since we've been wearing tricorn hats. I'm mindful of the Joint Committee on the Conduct of the War after Bull Run, the congressional investigation of the sinking of the USS Maine, and how did we let that happen? The Joint Committee on the investigation of the aerial attack on Pearl Harbor and what went wrong, or the one on the communist attack on South Korea, and how did we get so surprised? These are but a few of the examples, but the story is familiar. Service chiefs given shifting, declining budgets that make the dollars that did arrive less flexible and less valuable. Endless questions by people like me in previous lives, wondering why so much treasure must be spent when there are domestic priorities that demand immediate action and we can eke out saving that will realize all of our dreams. Whatever saving that has been realized by this American bad habit of unpreparedness, it has been more than horrifically compensated for by scores more in spending and thousands more of American dead. I don't know, Mr. Chairman, what the next committee will be named, but I already know what its recommendations will be. Mr. Chairman, I don't want to waste any more of these warriors' time. We need to give them what they asked for, and I yield back.
Ms. Shea Porter.
Thank you, and I thank you all for being here. And I've had 6 years on this committee, and I think this is about the grimmest it's gotten. And so clearly we are not addressing these really crucial issues. I'm going to put a little bit of a change in the direction of the questioning. I understand, that we're falling behind in equipment, et cetera. But I am looking out at the world now as they look in on us. And I think I agree with you, General Goldfein, that when you were talking about people wondering, are they talking about it at home? I don't think we're talking about it enough right here. I think that what happens is these committees are like silos, and everybody's incredibly busy. I just ran from a committee hearing, another committee hearing, but we have to somehow or another address this. So I recognize the urgency, and I thank you. So what I'm looking at right now is, what about the rest of the world? Is the conversation going around, in your profession, are friends worried that we're not going to be able to keep our commitments, or we lack the will to keep our commitments? And are our enemies hopeful that we're going to just, get so bogged down in our budget issues that we're not going to properly fund? And I would appreciate hearing from each one of you on that.
I'll go first. I think the simple answer is yes. Our allies, our strategy is based on our ability to build partner capacity, and that they're going to be there with us if we have to face any of the future challenges. In order to do that, we have to be able to show up for exercises, work interoperability, do things with them, have them procure equipment that's interoperable with us, ideally made by the same manufacturers, by American manufacturers. We need to make it a little bit easier to be our partner across all areas. Intel sharing, acquisition, foreign military sales. But I think they look to us. And they've looked to us since the end of World War II, when this world was created, where the United States was the guarantor of peace and stability in the world. And whether it be NATO or ASEAN or any other security apparatus of the United Nations, they look to the United States. And so it's important that we as military members go out there in the profession of arms, not as Department of State or Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We maintain these relationships, and that we have to be able to go to our partners and say, we're going to be there for you, and then they can pass that back on to their political leaders, because we occupy a very interesting space out there in the international world.
Thank you.
Ma'am, technology changes over time, but the fundamentals of deterrence, I would argue, have not changed. It's capability times will. And the times is important, because if either side of those is zero, it equals zero. And so what I'll tell you is that we have the luxury, not only as Joint Chiefs, but throughout our career, of having developed relationships of trust and confidence with our counterparts around the world. And I can't tell you how important those relationships are. We call them mill to mill, or military to military. I think we could all give you examples of where sometimes diplomatically we may not have had agreements with country or country, but our relationships with fellow airmen, soldiers, those Marines are vital. And so we keep those along. And very often, to what General Neller is talking about, our commitment that brings that capability and brings that will is through the relationships that we build. This is one of those questions where it would be inappropriate to do a big, broad brush over, general concerns, because the reality is it's a bit mixed bag as you go around the world. But I can just tell you that we are committed to making sure that we keep those relationships alive and well.
Thank you.
Man, thanks for a great question. I would say that, and I appreciate you looking around the world and directing our attention there as well. In the very short term, we're in a very unstable environment right now. There's a lot of governments coming into place, elections. The world is shifting in many ways, including our administration as they settle in, we settle in. And in times of great uncertainty, there are also is the opportunity, I think, for a great miscalculation. And so it's even more important in my mind that during these times of uncertainty, we minimize that possibility of miscalculation by making sure we operate from a position of strength. And this strength will assure our allies that we will be there and not contribute to that uncertainty, not contribute to that instability. And it will also deter our enemies, so that even through the period of transition, they will wake up every morning and say, not today. This is not today to start something. And so in the very near term, and then I would say on a long term, and we can have a different conversation through the 2020s, we've got to assure that we operate from a position of strength for assurance and deterrence.
Right, and I'll add to that this committee knows our responsibility, and we are active in seeking the answers and recognizing that we have got to properly fund if we want you to do what we need you to do. So thank you.
I would echo my teammates here. Assuring allies is critical, and we do that through presence, exercises, exchanges. Interoperability is important to readiness and capability overall with our allies. The United States has a great set of allies and partners and friends around the world. I believe that is still strong. but we have to continue to make it strong. And virtual presence is actual absence. So we need to be there with them in the air, on the sea, and on the ground. And that will help reassure and stabilize various situations around the world. With respect to adversaries or enemies, you know, Fingers hit it on the head. It's capability plus will. The capability has to be real, it has to be seen, it has to be demonstrated, it has to be sensed, and your opponent needs to know that you have the will to use it. If you do that, then you'll have peace through strength, because you will definitely deter any rational actor on the other side.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman, for the extra time. I yield back.
Dr. Abraham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. As vitally critical as our schools, our infrastructure, and certainly cures for cancer are, I'm a physician and have certainly lost my, unfortunately, share of good people to that horrific disease. As important as all those are, I think we're all smart enough to understand that that makes no difference if we don't have a country and national security. So certainly I want to give you what you asked to protect our country. And General Milley, when you reminded us that our men and women in uniform unfortunately have to still rely on food stamps to feed their family, that's both a moral and ethical tragedy that I hope makes everyone angry, and we need to fix that problem. General Goldfein, I want to thank you for, I'm a mission pilot for the Civil Air Patrol, the Air Force Auxiliary, and I fly for the Green Flag program, which you had the foresight to actually start, which has been a phenomenal success, giving real-time training to our men and women on the ground. Last week, we heard from the vice chiefs. We were talking about the pilot shortage that you have referenced already, and the intellectual property and the institutional knowledge that these pilots, you said it takes at least 10 years to train that great pilot, and that's certainly true, that with this CR, retaining that pilot with what the airlines are now offering on the civilian side is almost an impossible task. My question is, what other areas of the DoD do any of you see where we're losing this intellectual property, this institutional knowledge because of this CR? And I'll start with you, General Goldfein.
Yes, sir. You know, the reality of the pilot shortage is it's actually not a military problem. It's a national challenge that we have all got to face. And, Chairman, this is something that I think we need to work together, because here's the basics. We in the United States Air Force produce about 1,200 pilots per year. The airlines, based on their projections, need 4,500 every year for the next decade. We're not going to buy our way out of that challenge. This is a supply-demand mismatch nationally to be able to produce the pilots we need to service the commercial, the business, the private, and the military aviation needs of the nation. So first and foremost, we have to have a national approach to this that looks at what are the incentives we can put in place to increase the supply going up for the pilots that we need to service all of these bins. And then what we need to do across the military, I would offer, is to approach it from a combination of quality of life and quality of service. Quality of life we tend to focus on, which is the financial piece and taking that financial burden off of a family, and that's important. But I would argue that quality of service is equally, if not more important. That we got to ensure that our pilots, our maintainers, that are getting the resources they need to train, that they feel like they can be competitive and the best that they can be, that they are part of a unit, that they're part of something that's better than themselves, that they know that they're in an organization where they are valued, that we take care of their families. All of the cultural things that go along with wearing these uniforms, that is as important as anything we do financially. And I would just offer that this is something we have to work together because it's a national crisis.
Admiral?
So I'll just add on, other areas that are under stress just from this competition for people that I described earlier. Certainly pilots, as we've mentioned, our cyber forces are very much under stress. Our nuclear-trained sailors are under stress. And our special forces have been extremely busy in this war, and they are also under stress. I'll tell you, just as we've said, none of these, we can't compete in money. And you know what? They didn't join for money.
Right.
I mean, we need to give them adequate resources to live, and I think with this bill and supplemental, we'll be meeting that responsibility. But these folks, they joined to sail and fly and operate at the high end, become the most lethal force on the earth to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. And that's all we have to do is keep that covenant with them, and they'll keep coming. If they start to doubt that, they're going to go to where the money is.
Thank you. I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Banks?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here and for your service. I'm rather unique on the committee. I don't serve a district that has an active duty military base. However, in my district in Northeast Indiana, we are the proud home of Indiana's Air National Guard, 122nd Fighter Wing. The men and women of the 122nd serve our country with distinction and often go into harm's way in service to our nation, just as our active duty troops do as well. Yet I'm concerned that the prospect of a CR will have an even greater impact on our National Guard and Reserve forces than the active component. General Goldfein, while I'm dismayed at the prospect of yet another CR, can we have some sort of commitment from you, or what kind of commitment can you make on behalf of your branch that a continuing resolution will not have a disproportionate impact on our National Guard or Reserve forces?
Sir, I can tell you this. I can't do the mission without the Air National Guard, period. You go into a cockpit of a C-17 today and ask the crew that's in the front of that cockpit, okay, who's active, who's Guard, who's Reserve? I can't tell you the number of times that I've flown in C-17s and all three hands go up. You actually can't tell us apart. So we, first and foremost, we can't do the mission without the Air National Guard. So my commitment to you is that this is one Air Force, and I'm their chief. And so I'm going to make sure that the Air National Guard has everything it needs commensurate with the force, because we're one Air Force to accomplish the mission we're given.
I appreciate that strong statement and commitment. Another frequent concern that I hear related to the supply chain and spares account that are required to keep our A-10s flying is related to the suppliers that are no longer in the A-10 business. So can you speak a little bit to how the continuing resolution would affect or impact the supply chain of the A-10 specifically?
So it's not so much it'll have that much impact on the supply chain. It'll have more of an impact in terms of our ability to take those A-10s and put them in depot maintenance, because that depot maintenance line will stop. And it will stop because the civilian hiring freeze and a combination of other things. I'm going to have to figure out how to get we're each going to have to figure out how to pay the bill. Okay, so for the Air Force, it's $2.8 billion. To find $2.8 billion, one of the things I'm going to have to do is stop a lot of depot maintenance lines. And the A-10 will be directly affected. And it's not linear, meaning at the end of that time frame, when we get appropriation, it's not like you just start the line back up immediately, because all those workers that have left, we haven't been able to hire their backfill, and they've lost their qualifications. And so there's going to be a spin-up time at the end when we get an appropriation to get those lines back up and running. So what you have in the middle is a number of aircraft, and oh, by the way, the aircraft that have been flying in the fight are coming due for their maintenance. And so it continues that backlog over time, and what you end up doing is grounding aircraft. And so while I could buy all the parts in the world, if I chose to be able to do that within my flexibility, those parts will sit on the shelf because I don't have the workforce I need to put those parts in the airplane.
I appreciate the insight. I yield back.
Ms. McSally.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for your testimony and your service and your leadership and your candor about the impact on the men and women in uniform who are putting their lives on the line to protect our freedoms. And I really appreciate it, and I hope there's a lot of people out there listening, and there'll be a lot of stories about what you've said today. Admiral Richardson, I want to start off with a story that troubled me about 100 pilots that are essentially refusing to fly. Having been a pilot myself, to get to the point where you don't trust your equipment and you think your life and your student's life is in danger is pretty severe. And now some of that is because of the aging fleet and the resource implications that have been discussed today, but it sounds like some of it is also a leadership issue. So can you please comment on what the Navy is doing to address this issue? That's going to be impacting, obviously, our readiness, our pipeline, morale, and the lives of the men and women.
Certainly, thank you for the question. And as has been said before, this is the top safety priority for naval aviation. It is It is a vexing problem, and this is not a resource-constrained thing. This is an area where we're applying every bit of resources we need. Cost is not an issue as we approach this problem. It, as you said, is directly related to crew safety, and it has got the full attention of all leadership in the naval aviation enterprise.
You're aware that that's some of the quotes by instructors, that's not how they felt, right?
Right. Well, so let me just continue my answer.
Yep.
To address this, we've established a dedicated team, and I'm going to take a little bit of time to step through it because it's complicated. And that team will stay on this from a technical standpoint until it's fixed. But as I said, it's a complex problem, and it requires a multidimensional solution. First and foremost is the human dimension, and communication is a big part of that. And so when we heard about the concerns of our instructor pilots in our training wings, we sent a team down there to make sure that we fully understood their concerns and they fully understood what we were doing. I think what we had there more than anything else was a breakdown in communication. And those teams are on site now. They're working through each of the training wings, and they're resolving their differences in perspective and differences in communication. And so in addition, from the human perspective, the crew and their awareness is going to be the most important thing towards minimizing risk here. And so we've improved training to make sure they recognize the symptoms of hypoxia and related effects. We've improved their training on emergency procedures. That includes training in simulators where they actually feel those effects and go through those procedures. And as I said, we're making sure that we're listening and they all feel like they can be talking to leadership so we understand where their anxiety and concerns are. It's a constant effort.
I appreciate it. I'd like to follow up more with you maybe after the hearing. I appreciate and would like to stay in touch on the impacts on this.
I'll make sure we do that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. General Goldfein, you've eloquently expressed the challenges of a CR and how it's going to impact flying operations, saying squadrons will be grounded in June. I don't know if everybody who's listening fully understands what that means. So even to just localize it for Davis-Monthan. So the Bulldogs that I commanded are over schwacking bad guys right now. When they come home in the summer, they're going to be grounded. Like no flying, no upgrades, no training. They're done, right?
So, ma'am, what I will tell you is that if you don't have a unit on your base that is either preparing to go, that's directly preparing to go into conflict, you will have the equivalent of a no-fly zone over your base.
Yeah, this is unprecedented. I know that happened for a little while, a few years ago, but this is unprecedented in the impact it's going to have. They need to be ready to go anywhere in the world on 24 hours notice, as you know. Similarly, the EC-130s, their only capability in the world, and the cross-decking, the training and everything, same thing, right? They're done.
Yes, ma'am. And so Congress gave us acquisition authorities and told us to use those authorities to speed up acquisition. There's no better example than Compass Call. Electronic warfare asset in high demand in this fight, and it's going to be a central asset in any fight. So we took those authorities and we looked at how could we rapidly take the exact same equipment that's on the current EC-130 and cross-deck it.
But with a CR?
It stops.
It stops, okay.
That contract going forward stops.
Red flags, we talked about Air Warriors, Angel Thunder, same thing. Those that are going to deploy to rescue Americans in harm's way, their training's done as well.
No, ma'am. Very, very clear.
Yeah.
There will be no degradation to folks that we are preparing to go into the fight.
That's okay. I hear you. But
training,
as you know, that's just-in-time training. But the cumulative effect of missing out training throughout the year does have a degradation. Is that fair?
Absolutely.
And we've got 1,000 fighter pilots short, and you're grounding pilots, and we're expecting them to stay. That's insane. You agree?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Thank you, Mr. I yield back. Thanks.
Mr. Hunter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, great to see you. I guess let me ask, my first question is, how do you mitigate the risk of not fighting? And let me give an example. Haven't had a naval battle in a long time. I mean, ships shooting at ships with cannons, right? We haven't had air-to-air combat in quite a long time. Places we're at right now, we have air superiority. We know how to set up FOBs. We know how to do life support. We're the best expeditionary military since the Romans. I mean, it's amazing what all of you do and what our services can do. How do you mitigate the risk of atrophy when it comes to facing peer competitor countries? And I'm looking for one word.
Training.
Training.
That's it.
All right,
That's all
that's
it
my,
is. It's
that's
all
my
about.
question. So it's training.
Follow on, Ms. McSally. It's not just airplanes that are shutting down training in July. The entire Army's training is shutting down, except those guys that are deploying. Same,
Navy.
I'm sure it's the same thing in the Navy and the Marines as well. It's across the board, and training is the answer. That's how you mitigate it.
How does training get slammed by the CR?
It stops.
It stops, right?
Right.
You know, what happened? But the units.
That's what the op-tempo. What happens is the op-tempo money, the gas, the parts, the ammunition, that ceases. And so people still get paid, but there's no training going on. So what ends up happening is if called upon, this is for the bench now, if called upon for some unknown contingency that no one can predict right this moment, but if it happens, people are going to be going out the door with equipment that is less than optimally maintained, units that are not properly trained, and we're going to be putting young men and women into harm's way that are not ready for that level of combat. That's what's going to happen with the lack of training.
Sir, I would just add that this is also, there's a lot of that contained in that supplemental.
That's right.
And so it is the combination of both that we need favorable attention to, not only the FY17 budget, but there's a lot of training operating money in that supplemental.
And I think you both probably have the same answer. Mr. Chairman, I just want to thank you for your leadership on this. You came out very publicly and said you're not going to vote for a defense, for a CR that is for defense. I just want to say thanks for your leadership on this. We're behind you. Thank you, gentlemen. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. Ms. Cheney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'd like to start by thanking all of you very much for your service, for being here today. Associate myself also with the comments of Mr. Hunter and the Chairman. I will not support a CR either in terms of the damage that it will do to the Defense Department. We are engaged, as you all know, in a whole range of crucial issues here on the Hill, issues that affect the nation domestically, health care, tax reform. I would argue that none of those is as important as this issue we face today, and if we get this wrong, none of those matter either. That we're in a situation today, as you've all laid out during this hearing, that we've got to make sure that not only do we fill the gaps, but that we begin to rebuild our superiority. And in that regard, General Keane testified last year about the extent to which we're running the risk now of not prevailing in a fight in some circumstances. And I'd like to ask each of you to talk about the shortfalls that we face, which you've detailed very effectively today, but talk about it in the context of the overall threat. And as we see our own capabilities decline, in too many instances, it seems to me, we've seen the capabilities of our adversaries increasing and advancing. And so whether we're talking about ISIS, North Korea, China, Russia, Iran, if you could just talk for a little bit about the extent to which our declining capabilities have just created a gap, which may be a gap of historic proportions in terms of where our adversaries are. General Neller, I'll start with you.
I think we've all watched this over the last 5 to 6 years as we've been continuing to evolve in the daily grind of the counterterrorism fight. We've seen the growth of the capabilities of the Chinese, the Russians, the Iranians, the North Koreans. And what on the countering to that is our up-tempo has stayed high because of what's gone on fiscally, our ability to modernize and start to train to face that type of a threat and develop the capabilities through equipment and training and leverage technology. We've made a move. We've started to do that. I mean, it's not like we've been sitting here ignoring it, but to get to that point, while at the same time do what we do on a day-to-day basis, it's the equivalent of rebuilding the airplane or the vehicle as you're driving down the road, moving toward the day-to-day efforts. You're trying to rebuild the thing in motion, which is difficult enough, but if you don't have the resources to do that, and fifth-generation stuff is expensive. It is, and we all want to drive down the cost. We all want to get it faster. But to do that, we need to have adequate resourcing, and it's got to be stable. We're not going to get a good price point on any of this stuff if we can't tell the vendor, okay, we're in for 3, 4, 5, 6 years, because we know we can buy 5 for the price of 3.5 or whatever it is if we can get the money to get the long-term contract. So that's the dilemma we face. It would be great if we could stop and get a timeout. People have talked about the interwar period. We have had no interwar period. We've been since 9/11 at war, and I don't see there being an interwar period, which makes it difficult, but it also makes it necessary that the resources are there to maintain the current fight, but to build up the capability for the fight that we hope doesn't come. And if we are ready and we have the capability, the probability that it will come goes down. But we can't assume that it won't.
Thank you. General Goldfein, could you also talk, I know we're focused on the CR, but the Budget Control Act and sequestration as a whole, and whether we really can do what we need to do before we repeal those?
Yes, ma'am. And I would just say that one of the things you've heard from us here is that when called to go, we go. We've heard all the impacts of a CR. We're going to cancel exercise. We're going to cancel training. But let no one question for a second that when the United States militaries are called upon, we go. And when you take the combined military might, although none of us as Joint Chiefs are happy with our current level of readiness, for those that may be listening, ought to have no question in their mind that if they take us on, they lose. I'll give you just one example. If Mr. Putin makes a bad choice, he will face the combined economic and military might of 28 nations in the most powerful alliance we've ever been part of. And that spells his loss. So we're going to work with you on ensuring that we can manage this to the best of our ability. We've been through sequestration before, and I think we would all tell you we still haven't recovered from that. And one of the worst things we did during that entire period when we shut down the government was we broke faith with our civilian workforce, and especially our young civilian workforce that don't have the luxury of 4 to 5 months of pay, in the bank that can cover them while they're out of work. And we had so many civilian workers, young civilian workers, that left the government service because they couldn't pay the bills. Or those that didn't pay the bills then had security challenge issues, because one of the things we look at are their financial reports. And they left government service, talented young men and women, and never came back. We can't go through that again.
My time's expired. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. I yield back.
Thank you all for your time, your testimony, and your service. The earlier conversation General Milley had, Mr. Russell referenced to some historical parallels, reminds me that tomorrow, April 6th, is the 100th anniversary of our entry into World War I. We tend to think about World War II and Patton's dash across Europe, Iwo Jima, those incredible battles. But the thing about World War I is nobody ever thought it would happen. They all traded with each other. The rulers were related to one another. And they thought they could outbluff each other, that there might be a skirmish, and yet a whole generation of European men were wiped out in World War I. It just, I think, should be a sober reminder to all of us about the stakes of what we're talking about here. They are incredibly high. And I appreciate y'all's testimony. As you've heard many times, I think it's been sobering. The bottom line is we have to do better than CRs, than not passing a supplemental, than sequestration. We have to do better than that. Hearing stands adjourned.